Hello and welcome back. So in this lecture and in next few lectures, we are going to handle Mongoose errors. And we are going to handle them in such a way that in development, the client receives a detailed error information. But in production, the client receives a user-friendly error message. So in this lecture, we are going to handle the invalid ID error. So let me practically show you what error we are going to handle in this lecture. So let's first go to VS Code. And in here, there are few changes which I want to do. So first of all, if you see the status code variable and the status variable, we are not using anymore. And in this prod errors function and in this dev errors function, when we want to read the status code, we are directly reading it from the error object. In the same way, if we want to read the status, we are directly reading it from the error object. But as we have learned before, not all the error objects will have the status code property or the status property. So for that, earlier we were setting a default value. But now since we are not using the status code variable and status variable, those default values will not be set. So here what I'm going to do is instead of creating a variable and then setting a default value on that variable, here I'm directly going to set a default value for the error.status. So if the error object does not have a status code property, we want to create that status code property and we want to assign it with the default value. Same thing I want to do for status. So here, let me copy this and let me paste it here. So if the status property does not exist, it will be created and it will be assigned with this default value. But if the status property exists, then that value will be used. I hope this is clear. So let me save the changes here. Then the next thing which we are going to do is in the last lecture, we changed the environment from development to production. So I'm going to change it back to development first so that I can show you the error. So here I have saved the changes. Let's go to terminal. Let me stop the process by pressing Ctrl C and let's restart this process by running npm start command. So our application is up and running now. Connection to DB is also successful. Let's go to Postman. And from here, let me close these requests. So I'll not save this request. I'll simply close it. I'll also close this request and let's keep this get all hotel request. And here let's go to get hotel by ID request. Now here, in order to get a hotel by its ID, if I provide a valid ID and if I send the request, so if a hotel with that ID is found, the Express application is going to send us a hotel document in the response. So here you see, we have received a hotel document with that ID in the response. But if I pass an ID for which we do not have a hotel document in the hotels collection, for example, if I change the last two characters here, so it is possible that with this ID, we do not have any hotel document in the hotel collection. So in that case, we are already handling it. So in that case, we should receive 404 not found response. As you can see, we have received 404 not found response, which is also correct. But for the ID, if I pass a value, remember that the ID value which we are passing here in order to get a hotel document, what Express is doing is basically we are using Mongoose here in order to get a hotel document, in order to query a hotel document from the hotels collection. So we are using this find by ID method. So when we are using this find by ID method and when we are passing this ID, first that ID will be converted to an object ID. If you see from here, we are passing a string value. So this string value will be first converted to an object ID, and then using that object ID, the document will be searched in the MongoDB database. So if I pass a value here, which cannot be converted to an object ID, for example, 100, this value cannot be converted to object ID. In that case, here, when we are trying to query a document using this find by ID method, and there we have passed the value as ID, here, when Mongoose will try to convert that ID value to an object ID, that conversion will fail, that casting will fail, because this value will not be converted to an object ID. And in that case, Mongoose will throw us an error. So if I send this request, you will see that Mongoose has thrown an error, and that error we have received in the response. So as we have learned, whenever there will be an error in our Express application, that error will be handled by the global error handling middleware. So here, since this value was not converted to an object ID, Mongoose thrown an error. And remember that this is not a validation error. Here, it is a casting error. Mongoose was not able to cast a value from string type to object ID type. So here we have a casting error, and you can see that error here. So here you can see the status is error and the status code is 500, because this error is not created by our AppError class. This error is thrown by Mongoose. And if I go back to our global error handling middleware, there, if the error object does not have a status code, here, since this error was thrown by Mongoose, it will not have a status code. In that case, we are setting the status code to 500. So that's what you are seeing here. The status code is 500. And also, since there was also not any status property on the error, so this default value is being used. And that's why here the status is error. Here you can see the complete error object. You will not see any status code property or the status property on this error object. So that's why the default value is used for the status code and the default value is being used for the status property. And you can also see the error message here, which says that cast to object ID failed for this value 100. And this error has occurred on this ID field. Now, I will try to do the same thing in production environment. And for that, now I'm going to change the node environment to production. Okay, let me save the changes and let's go to terminal. Let me stop the process and let's start it again. So now we are running our Node.js application in production mode. So Express server is up and running and connection to DB is successful. Let's go to Postman now and let's try to send this request again, but this time our application is running in production mode. So let's see what error we get. You will see in this case, we have received a generic error response where it says something went wrong. And here I have a spelling mistake. Please try again later. And there the status code is 500 and status is error. So if I go back to VS Code, let's go to errorController.js and there we have our prod errors. So this prod errors function is going to run when we are in the production mode. And since the Mongoose error which has occurred, it is not an operational error. There on the error object, we did not have this is operational property. So that was not an operational error. So that's why this else condition was executed. And from within this else condition, what we are sending? We are sending the status as error and the message as something went wrong. Please try again later. So since the Mongoose error is not an operational error, for that error, this generic response is being sent. But here, I don't want to send a generic response because here the user is trying to pass a value which cannot be converted to the appropriate type. So here the user is doing something wrong and our application should tell the user that he is providing an invalid value and he needs to rectify that. And to do that, what we need to do is we need to make this Mongoose error as an operational error so that we can send a proper error message with a proper status code. Now let's see how we can do that. So for that again, let me change the environment to development so that we can see the error properties. Okay, let me rerun this application and we are going to run this application in development mode because now I have changed the node environment to development. So let's go back to Postman and if I send the request now we should have a detailed error. So here if you have a look at this error object has few properties which we can use. So first of all, you will see that the error name is CastError and the error name will be CastError whenever Mongoose fails to cast a value from one type to another type. And you can also see the field on which the error has occurred. And you can also see the value for which the error has occurred. And then using this kind, you can also see that it was trying to convert this value to object ID. The initial value type, the value type which we are passing is string, but it was trying to cast it to object ID. And this is where the casting has failed. So we can make use of some of these properties in order to handle this invalid ID error. Let's see how we can do that. So let's go back to VS Code and let's go to our errorController.js. And in here, what I'm going to do is inside this else block where we are calling the prod errors function. Here, before calling this function, I'm going to write an if statement, and there I'm going to check if error.name, if it is equal to CastError. So I'm going to copy that name from here. So if the error is CastError, in that case, I'm going to call a function. So for that here, I'm going to create another function and I'm going to call it as handleCastError. Okay, here to this function, we will pass the error object, and here I'm going to create a new error object using our AppError class. So for that, I'll say new AppError. Okay, and to use this AppError, we also need to import it. So let's see if that import statement has been added. So that import statement has been added here. So we are importing that AppError and we are creating an instance of this AppError. Now, while creating the instance of this AppError, we need to pass a value for the message parameter and a value for the status code parameter. So let me also go ahead and let me create a variable. I'll call it as error message. You can name it anything. And here, let's say the error message is invalid value. And then here I want to show the value which we are trying to cast. So I'm also going to wrap it within single quotes. And to get the value which we are trying to cast on this error object, if I go to Postman, we have this value property. So this value property I'm going to use to get the value which we are trying to cast. And then I'll say for field or maybe for property. And then I want to show the property name. Again, I'll first wrap it in single quotes. And then here we can say error dot. And then we have this path variable, this path property, which is storing the field which we are trying to cast. So I'm going to use that path property here. And that's it. And this is the message I'm going to pass to this AppError class. And then for the status code here, I'm going to pass 400 because here the user is the one who is passing some data which is not a valid data. And whenever with the request, we receive some invalid data, some bad data, in that case, we send a bad request. And for the bad request, the status code is 400. Okay, so this is the error object which we are creating. Now from here, I'm going to return this error object. Okay, now let me copy this function and let's call it from within this if block. And to this, we need to pass the error object. So I'm going to pass this error here. And we know that this function is going to return us an instance of AppError class. So I'm going to store it in another variable and I'll simply call it as AppError. You can call this variable anything, okay? But I'm just calling it as AppError to differentiate it from this error object. This is the original error which has occurred and this is the AppError which we have created. Now remember that here when we have used this AppError class to create an error, this error will be an operational error because inside this AppError we are setting is operational to true. So this error will be an operational error. Okay, and here we have an operational error and now we want to pass this AppError to this prod errors function. So for that, first of all, what I'll have to do is I'll have to create this variable. So let me copy this and let me paste it here and let me create it using let keyword because I want to reassign it here. And initially I will set it with the value null, or maybe here I will set this AppError with the actual error object. And here I want to create a copy of this error object and I want to assign that copy to this AppError because if I don't do that, currently both AppError and this error object will point to the same object. So if we modify AppError, it will also modify this error object and I want to avoid that. So here I'm going to create a copy of this error object. For that I'm going to use spread operator. So first I'm wrapping it within curly braces and then on that I'm going to use the spread operator. What it will do is it will extract all the properties of this error object and it will create a new object with those properties. So here this AppError is storing a copy of the error object. And here, if the error name is CastError, in that case, we are assigning this AppError with an instance of the AppError class. Okay. And here to this prod errors, we are going to pass that AppErrors now. So if the error is not a CastError, in that case, this AppError is basically this error object. It is a copy of that error object. But if the error is a CastError, in that case, we are creating an instance of AppError class with a message and the status code as 400. And since that error is created using this AppError class, it will also have is operational property set to true. And with this, let's save the changes. Currently, our application is running in development mode. If I go to Postman, from there, if I send this request, we will not see, okay, here we have an error. So let's go to Postman and let's see what error do we have. And it says, okay, we have an error inside this function because here we are creating a variable with the same name as the parameter. So here I'm simply going to call it as err. And from here, let's return err. Let's save the changes. Let's go to terminal. Now our application is up and running and connection to DB is also successful. Now let's go to Postman. Let me make a request. So currently we are in the development mode. And here, since we are in the development mode, if you see in the development mode inside this dev errors, we are not handling the CastError in any way. We are handling it in production errors, right? So in the development, we are going to get this same error where the status code will be 500, status will be error, and here you can see the complete error object as well, and also this error message, which is thrown by Mongoose. But now if we run our application in production environment, so for that, let's change this node env to production. Let's save the changes. One more time, let's go back to terminal. There, let's stop the process by pressing Ctrl C and let's start this process. And this time, this process will start in production mode. So now the application is running in production mode. Now if I go to Postman and if I send the request, now we should get 400 bad request, which is correct. Status is fail, and the error message you will see it says invalid value 100 for property ID. And this is the error which we are creating inside this handle cast error, right? So in production mode, we are sending a friendly message to the end users. But in development mode, we are sending as much error information as we can to the client. All right. So this is all I wanted to cover in this lecture. If you have any questions from this lecture, then feel free to ask it. Thank you for listening and have a great day.